Have you ever done something nice for someone, only to have it completely backfire? What if one small act of kindness unraveled your entire life as you knew it? That's exactly what happened to me, and today, I'm going to share my story. A story about trust, boundaries, and how one mysterious neighbor changed everything I thought I understood about people. By the end of this video, you'll not only hear a tale that will leave you questioning your own relationships but also learn some hard truths about human nature, and maybe even yourself. Picture this: a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens. Kids ride their bikes down empty streets, lawns are perfectly manicured, and everyone keeps to themselves. This was my world, a peaceful little bubble far removed from the chaos of city life. I moved here looking for calm, craving a break from the noise and drama of the urban jungle. And at first glance, it seemed perfect. But beneath the surface, there were secrets waiting to be uncovered, starting with a man named Alex. Profile: Quen 2.5 Max. 6:23 a.m. Intro script for the video. Have you ever done something nice for someone, only to have it completely backfire? What if one small act of kindness unraveled your entire life as you knew it? That's exactly what happened to me, and today, I'm going to share my story. A story about trust, boundaries, and how one mysterious neighbor changed everything I thought I understood about people. By the end of this video, you'll not only hear a tale that will leave you questioning your own relationships but also learn some hard truths about human nature, and maybe even yourself. Pause for dramatic effect. Picture this: a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing exciting ever happens. Kids ride their bikes down empty streets, lawns are perfectly manicured, and everyone keeps to themselves. This was my world, a peaceful little bubble far removed from the chaos of city life. I moved here looking for calm, craving a break from the noise and drama of the urban jungle. And at first glance, it seemed perfect. But beneath the surface, there were secrets waiting to be uncovered, starting with a man named Alex. My name isn't important, but my story might be. Because what started as an innocent attempt to be friendly turned into something far more complicated and dangerous than I could have imagined. You see, when Alex moved in 2 houses down, he didn't just bring boxes, he brought questions. Questions I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. But before we dive deeper, let me set the scene for you. Imagine waking up every morning to the sound of birds chirping instead of car horns honking. The elderly man next door waves politely but never says much. Across the street, a family throws wild parties on weekends, filling the air with laughter and music. It's predictable, comfortable, safe. At least, that's what I thought until he showed up. One night, late, I noticed someone carrying boxes into the house 2 doors down. He wore headphones, avoided eye contact, and disappeared inside without so much as a nod. There was something off about him. Something intriguing. Little did I know, meeting him would lead me down a path I never saw coming. This is more than just a personal story, it's a lesson in human behavior. In the twists and turns of trust and betrayal. If you stick around till the end, I promise you won't regret it. So grab a cup of coffee, or tea, if that's your thing, and settle in because this is going to get intense. And hey, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of curious minds who love stories like these. Trust me, you don't want to miss out on what's coming next. The first real interaction happened on a Sunday afternoon. I had spent the morning baking, a habit I picked up during those early weeks in the neighborhood when I was still trying to adjust to the quiet. The cookies were simple, just chocolate chip, but they smelled warm and inviting, like a small piece of home. I thought it might be nice to welcome Alex to the neighborhood properly. After all, everyone deserves a little kindness when they're starting fresh. I wrapped them in a neat bundle, tied with a ribbon I found in one of my drawers, and walked over to his house. My heart was beating faster than it should have been for such a mundane task. Maybe it was the uncertainty of how he'd react, or maybe it was just the mystery surrounding him that made me uneasy. Either way, I knocked on his door and waited. When he opened it, he looked surprised, almost startled. His headphones were around his neck this time, and there was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead, like he'd been moving furniture or unpacking again. He glanced at the package in my hands, then back at me, before finally speaking. "What's this?" His voice was low, guarded, but not unkind. It's just a little something, I said quickly, holding out the cookies. To say welcome to the neighborhood. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took the bundle. His fingers brushed against mine briefly, and I felt an unexpected jolt of something. It wasn't much, just a fleeting touch, but it lingered in my mind longer than it should have. Thanks, he said after a pause, his tone softening slightly. That's nice of you. You're welcome, I replied, forcing a smile. If you need anything else, feel free to ask. I'm right down the street. He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't entirely comfortable with the offer. Yeah, thanks, he repeated, stepping back into his house. Before I could say anything else, the door closed, leaving me standing there with an odd mix of satisfaction and unease. Over the next few days, I caught glimpses of him through windows or while walking past his house. Sometimes he was outside, rearranging things in his garage or watering plants that looked like they hadn't seen care in weeks. Other times, he sat on the porch, scrolling through his phone or staring off into the distance. Each time, I debated whether to wave or say hello, but I never did. Something about him kept me at arm's length, not rudeness, exactly, but a kind of invisible barrier that made it hard to approach. Then came the day I saw him struggling with a heavy bookshelf. He was alone, trying to maneuver it through the narrow doorway of his house, and failing miserably. Without thinking, I hurried over. Need some help, I called out, already halfway across his yard. Alex froze mid-struggle, looking both annoyed and relieved. Sure, he muttered, stepping aside reluctantly. Together, we managed to wrestle the bookshelf inside, though not without a few awkward bumps along the way. When it was finally in place, we stood there catching our breath, sweat trickling down our foreheads. Thanks, Alex said again, running a hand through his dark hair. This time, his gratitude seemed genuine. I probably shouldn't have tried to do this by myself. No problem, I replied, smiling. You know, if you ever need another pair of hands, or advice on how to avoid breaking your back, you can always ask. He chuckled softly, and for the first time, I saw a crack in that carefully constructed wall of his. Noted. Though I'll try not to make a habit of needing rescuing. We talked for a bit after that, nothing too personal, just casual chit-chat about the weather and the quirks of the neighborhood. But even in those brief exchanges, I noticed things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the dry humor in his voice, the subtle tension in his posture whenever the conversation veered toward anything remotely intimate. There was depth to him, layers I couldn't quite decipher yet, and it intrigued me more than I cared to admit. As the weeks went on, our interactions became less accidental and more intentional. I found excuses to check in on him, borrowing sugar I didn't actually need, offering gardening tips for his wilting plants, complimenting his choice of music when I heard it drifting from his open window. At first, he responded with polite detachment, but gradually, he began to loosen up. We started talking more often, sharing snippets of our lives in bits and pieces. One evening, as we sat on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized just how much I enjoyed his company. There was something comforting about the rhythm of our conversations, the easy silences that fell between words. And yet, there was also an undercurrent of something else, something I couldn't quite name. Every now and then, I'd catch myself staring at his lips as he spoke, or lingering a beat too long when our hands accidentally brushed during a shared activity. I told myself it was harmless admiration, nothing more. After all, Alex was complicated, reserved, someone who clearly valued his privacy above all else. Whatever connection we had, it existed within carefully drawn boundaries. Or so I thought. It wasn't until later that I realized how wrong I was. The more time I spent with Alex, the harder it became to ignore the way my feelings were shifting. What had started as casual neighborly gestures began to feel like something deeper, something I wasn't sure either of us was ready for. It wasn't just the stolen glances or the lingering touches anymore, it was the way my chest tightened whenever he smiled at me, or how his voice seemed to wrap itself around my thoughts long after our conversations ended. One rainy afternoon, everything changed. The storm rolled in suddenly, dark clouds swallowing the sky and drenching the streets in minutes. I was sitting by the window, watching the water cascade down the glass, when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there he was, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead, clutching a leather jacket that did little to shield him from the rain. "Hey," he said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the downpour. "Mind if I come in for a sec?" I stepped aside without hesitation, grabbing a towel from the hallway closet as he dripped onto the mat. "You look like you've been through a hurricane," I joked, handing him the towel. "Feels like it too," he muttered, rubbing it over his head before draping it around his shoulders. He glanced around the room, taking in the cozy chaos of my living space, before settling onto the couch. I joined him, pulling a blanket over both of us to ward off the chill. For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain hammered against the windows, filling the silence with its steady rhythm. But then, almost hesitantly, Alex began to talk. At first, it was small things, how frustrating it was to unpack boxes in weather like this, how he hadn't expected moving to be so isolating. But as the minutes passed, his words grew heavier, layered with emotion. "I left a lot behind when I moved here," he admitted, staring at the floor. "A job I hated but couldn't quit, a relationship that, well, let's just say it wasn't healthy. I thought starting over would fix everything, but instead, it feels like I'm stuck in limbo." His vulnerability caught me off guard. Up until that point, Alex had always seemed so self-contained, so determined to keep people at arm's length. Seeing him like this, raw and unguarded, made me want to reach out, to tell him he wasn't alone. So I did. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," I said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "Sometimes just surviving is enough." He turned to look at me then, his eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge whether I truly meant what I'd said. For a moment, it felt like the world outside the window had disappeared, leaving only the two of us in that quiet, rain-soaked cocoon. And then, without warning, he leaned closer. Our faces were inches apart, close enough for me to feel the warmth of his breath against my skin. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing louder than the storm raging outside. This was it, the moment where boundaries blurred and uncertainty took over. But just as quickly as it happened, Alex pulled away, standing abruptly and pacing toward the window. "I shouldn't have done that," he muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. "I'm sorry." "It's okay," I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. "We're both just figuring things out." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Something had shifted between us, something irreversible. The ease we once shared now carried an undertone of tension, a question hanging in the air neither of us dared to answer. In the days that followed, Alex distanced himself again. Our conversations became shorter, less frequent, and the warmth that had once defined our interactions faded into something colder, more formal. I tried not to take it personally, telling myself he needed space to process whatever was going on in his mind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd misread the entire situation, that maybe what I thought was mutual attraction was nothing more than wishful thinking on my part. Still, I couldn't stop wondering about him. About the man who had let his walls down, however briefly, only to retreat behind them again. Was he regretting what had almost happened between us? Or was there something else driving him away, something he wasn't ready to share? It wasn't until one particularly restless night that I decided to confront him. Standing on his porch under the pale glow of the streetlights, I knocked on his door, determined to get some answers. When he answered, his expression was guarded, but he didn't turn me away. "We need to talk," I said firmly, stepping inside before he could protest. "About the other day." Alex sighed, closing the door behind me. "Look, I already told you, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have put you in that position." "That's not what I'm asking," I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What I want to know is why you keep pushing me away. One minute you're opening up, letting me in, and the next you're shutting me out completely. What's really going on, Alex?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening as if weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "You're too trusting. That'll get you into trouble someday." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Too trusting. Was that what this was about? Did he think I was naive, gullible, someone who couldn't handle the truth? Before I could respond, he walked past me, opening the door again. "I think it's best if we keep our distance for a while," he said quietly, avoiding my gaze. "For your sake." And just like that, he closed the door between us, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The days that followed felt like walking on eggshells. Alex's words echoed in my mind. Asterisk, you're too trusting. That'll get you into trouble someday. What did he mean? Was it a warning, or was it something deeper? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he had let on, and the more I thought about it, the more his behavior began to make less sense. The late-night moves, the guarded conversations, the way he seemed to disappear whenever other neighbors were around, it all pointed to something bigger. Something hidden. At first, I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. Maybe he just valued his privacy, or maybe he really was dealing with personal struggles he wasn't ready to share. But the nagging curiosity wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I saw him from afar, or worse, when I didn't see him at all, it gnawed at me. My imagination ran wild, conjuring up scenarios ranging from harmless explanations to far-fetched suspicions. Eventually, I realized I needed answers, even if they came at a cost. It started innocently enough. One evening, as I watered the plants in my front yard, I noticed his car parked outside his house but no sign of him. Out of habit, I glanced toward his window, and for a brief moment, I caught a flicker of movement behind the curtains. It wasn't unusual, but something about it felt off. The next day, I found myself lingering by his mailbox under the pretense of checking mine. When I saw him step out briefly, I waved and called out a cheerful greeting. He nodded politely, though his smile didn't reach his eyes, and quickly retreated inside. That's when I decided to dig a little deeper, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, but because I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my gut. Late one night, unable to sleep, I grabbed a flashlight and told myself I was just taking out the trash. As I passed his house, I slowed my steps, peering through the gap in his curtains. What I saw stopped me cold. His living room was dimly lit, papers scattered across the coffee table. Some looked like official documents, others like photos. I squinted, trying to make out details, and froze when I recognized faces of people from our neighborhood. There was Mr. Thompson, the elderly man who always waved but kept to himself. There was Mrs. Carter, the head of the community association. Even the noisy family across the street appeared in one of the snapshots. My heart raced as I pieced things together. Whatever Alex was involved in, it wasn't small, and it certainly wasn't innocent. The next morning, I confronted him. I didn't plan it, I just acted on instinct. When I knocked on his door, he answered looking surprised, almost guilty. "Can we talk?" I asked, brushing past him before he could object. Inside, the evidence was undeniable. The same papers and photos I'd glimpsed the night before were still spread out, accompanied by a laptop displaying what looked like confidential files. "What is all this?" I demanded, gesturing toward the mess. Alex's expression shifted from shock to resignation. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I knew this would happen eventually," he muttered, sinking onto the couch. "I should have been more careful." "More careful? Careful about what? Who are you, Alex?" My voice trembled with a mix of anger and fear. He hesitated, then finally spoke. "My name isn't Alex, at least, not entirely. I'm a private investigator. I was hired to look into corruption within the neighborhood association. These people," he said, pointing to the photos, "are suspects. Or at least, they're connected to the case." The room spun as his words sank in. A private investigator, living 2 houses down, using me as part of his operation. Betrayal burned hot in my chest. So, everything, the moving here, the friendship, the whatever it was between us, it was all fake. Just part of your job. No, he shot back, standing abruptly. That's not true. Not entirely. Yes, I came here for work, but everything else, how I felt about you, how much I appreciated your kindness, that was real. You have to believe me. But could I? His admission left me reeling, torn between the emotions I'd invested in him and the realization that I'd been used. I thought back to every conversation, every shared moment, wondering which parts were genuine and which were calculated. Had he ever truly cared about me, or was I just another pawn in his investigation? "I need some time," I said finally, backing away toward the door. "To process all this." "Of course," he replied, his voice soft but strained. "Take all the time you need." Over the next few days, I avoided him completely. Each time I passed his house, I felt a pang of guilt mixed with anger. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to accept that his intentions weren't entirely malicious, but another part couldn't overlook the deception. I replayed our interactions in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed. Hadn't he always been evasive when I asked about his past? Hadn't he warned me about being too trusting? Yet, despite everything, I couldn't deny that our connection had felt real, at least to me. And maybe, just maybe, to him too. It was a sobering reminder of how easily lines can blur, how trust can be both a gift and a liability. By the time I finally worked up the courage to speak to him again, I knew one thing for certain. While Alex may have entered my life under false pretenses, the lessons I learned from our tangled story were painfully, undeniably true. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. I felt like I was caught in a storm, tossed between anger, hurt, and confusion. Every time I thought about Alex, his secrets, his lies, the way he had woven himself into my life, I felt a fresh wave of betrayal. But then there were moments when I remembered the warmth of his smile, the vulnerability in his voice during our late-night talks, and the weight of his apology. It was maddening, this push and pull between wanting to forgive him and needing to protect myself. I spent hours replaying everything in my mind, dissecting every interaction we'd ever had. Was it possible to separate the man from the mission? Could someone fake kindness, humor, and connection so convincingly? Or had he truly let his guard down with me, only to retreat behind it again when duty called? These questions haunted me, keeping me awake at night and stealing focus during the day. At first, I avoided the neighborhood altogether. I made excuses not to go outside, skipping morning walks and evening strolls. The sight of Alex's house was too much, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. But isolation didn't bring clarity, it only amplified my restlessness. So one afternoon, I forced myself to sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the world go by as if nothing had changed. Kids played in the cul-de-sac, Mr. Thompson watered his roses, and somewhere in the distance, the noisy family laughed over dinner. Life moved on, even when mine felt stuck in limbo. That's when I realized something. I wasn't just angry at Alex, I was angry at myself. For being too trusting, yes, but also for ignoring the red flags. Why hadn't I questioned his evasiveness sooner? Why had I let my guard down so easily? I prided myself on being observant, on reading people well, yet I had missed the truth staring me in the face. It was humbling, painful, and necessary all at once. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, I decided to write down everything I'd learned. Not just about Alex, but about myself. I filled pages with reflections on trust, boundaries, and the dangers of assuming good intentions without evidence. Writing helped me untangle the mess in my head, turning raw emotion into something tangible. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, not healed, exactly, but closer to understanding. Still, closure eluded me. As much as I wanted to move on, I knew I couldn't do that without confronting Alex one last time. So the next morning, I walked over to his house, heart pounding with equal parts dread and determination. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but not unwelcoming. "Hey," he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. We sat in silence for a while, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, I broke it. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "About your job, about why you're here." He nodded, his expression guarded. And I don't know what to think," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe you, that your feelings for me were real. But another part can't forget how you lied to me, how you used me to get close to these people." I gestured toward the stack of papers still sitting on his coffee table. "I never meant to hurt you," he said earnestly, leaning forward. "When I first met you, yeah, I saw an opportunity. But the more time I spent with you, the harder it became to keep things professional. You changed things for me. Made me question whether this job was worth losing someone like you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't what I expected, not an outright denial or deflection, but a confession tinged with regret. For a moment, I let myself imagine forgiving him, letting go of the anger and starting over. But reality quickly set in. Trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired, and maybe shouldn't be. "I believe you," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "But believing you doesn't mean I can forget what happened. You crossed a line, Alex. And no matter how genuine your feelings might have been, that's something I'll always carry with me." He looked away, pain flickering across his features. "I understand," he murmured. "I messed up. I know I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." We sat there for a while longer, neither of us speaking. There was nothing left to say, really. Our story had reached its natural conclusion, a bittersweet mix of honesty and finality. Before leaving, I turned back to him. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For telling me the truth, even if it came too late." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into rebuilding my sense of self. I journaled, exercised, reconnected with old friends, and explored hobbies I'd neglected. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd lost in the chaos of Alex's arrival. Slowly, the sharp edges of betrayal began to dull, replaced by a quiet resilience. I also paid closer attention to the dynamics of the neighborhood. Rumors swirled about Alex's investigation, though few knew the full extent of it. Some neighbors rallied together, determined to root out corruption and rebuild trust. Others grew paranoid, questioning motives and second-guessing relationships. Through it all, I stayed neutral, choosing to observe rather than engage. It wasn't my fight anymore. Looking back, I realized how much I'd grown since that rainy afternoon when Alex showed up on my doorstep. I had entered this chapter of my life seeking peace and simplicity, only to find complexity and heartbreak instead. But perhaps that was the point. Growth rarely comes from comfort zones, it emerges from challenges, mistakes, and lessons learned the hard way. By the time spring rolled around, the neighborhood felt different. New faces moved in, old ones moved out, and the community association underwent significant reforms. Life carried on, as it always does. And while scars remained, from Alex's deception and my own misplaced trust, I chose to see them not as wounds, but as reminders. Reminders to be kind, but cautious. To trust, but verify. To embrace connection, but never at the expense of authenticity. Alex eventually disappeared from the neighborhood as quietly as he'd arrived. Whether he completed his investigation or simply moved on, I never found out. But in a way, it didn't matter. His presence had already left an indelible mark on my life, one that shaped me in ways I never anticipated. Months passed, and the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The drama of Alex's investigation faded into whispers, then silence. Life returned to its predictable patterns. Kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac, Mr. Thompson tending to his roses, the noisy family throwing weekend parties that spilled laughter onto the streets. To an outsider, it might have seemed like nothing had changed, but for me, everything was different. I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked before, the way sunlight filtered through the trees in the early morning, the sound of birdsong as dusk settled over the rooftops, the quiet hum of life unfolding around me. These small moments felt richer now, infused with a clarity I hadn't possessed before. Maybe it was because I was more present, more intentional about how I spent my time. Or maybe it was simply the aftermath of surviving something that had once felt insurmountable. At first, I worried about slipping back into old habits, about letting the lessons I'd learned slip away with time. But they stayed with me, woven into the fabric of who I was becoming. I became more discerning without being cynical, more open without being naive. It wasn't always easy, there were days when doubt crept in, when I second-guessed my instincts or hesitated to trust someone new. But those moments taught me patience, with others and with myself. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch sipping tea, I noticed a moving truck parked 2 houses down. A young couple was unpacking boxes, their faces flushed with excitement and exhaustion. They reminded me of myself when I first moved here, all hope and optimism, eager to start fresh. For a moment, I considered introducing myself, offering a plate of cookies or some gardening advice. Then I paused, reflecting on how much I'd grown since those early days. When I finally walked over later that evening, it wasn't with expectations or ulterior motives, it was simply to say hello. We exchanged pleasantries, shared a few laughs about the quirks of suburban living, and promised to keep in touch. As I headed back home, I realized something profound: kindness didn't have to come with strings attached. It could exist purely for its own sake, untainted by agendas or fears. In the months that followed, I threw myself into fostering connections, not just with neighbors but within myself. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the local library, and even took up painting classes. Each experience brought joy, challenge, and growth, reminding me that life is made up of countless intersections, each one shaping us in ways we can't predict. There were still nights when I thought about Alex, wondering where he was and what he was doing. Did he think about me too? Did he regret the choices he'd made or feel proud of the work he'd done? I'll never know. But thinking about him no longer filled me with anger or sadness. Instead, I felt gratitude, for the lessons he inadvertently taught me, for the strength I discovered in navigating heartbreak, and for the reminder that people are rarely all good or all bad. They're human, flawed and multifaceted, just like me. By the end of the year, I stood on my porch watching fireworks light up the sky during the annual block party. Neighbors gathered together, sharing food, stories, and laughter. Kids ran around clutching sparklers, while adults toasted marshmallows over a makeshift fire pit. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, simple, beautiful, and perfectly perfect. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by bursts of color, I realized something important. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about integrating. It's about taking the pieces of your past, however painful, and weaving them into a narrative that makes you stronger. My story with Alex would always be part of me, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it served as a foundation, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. And so, as the final firework exploded overhead, painting the night sky in gold and crimson, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, life rarely is, but because I was okay with imperfection. I had learned to embrace uncertainty, to find beauty in complexity, and to move forward with courage, even when the path ahead wasn't clear. The road to self-discovery is long and winding, full of unexpected detours and hidden treasures. But every step, no matter how difficult, brings us closer to understanding ourselves, and to finding peace in the journey itself. So, what can we take away from this story? At its core, it's a reminder that trust is both a gift and a responsibility. It's about learning to balance kindness with boundaries, connection with caution. My experience with Alex taught me that people are layered. Sometimes they surprise you in the best ways, and sometimes they leave scars that take time to heal. But every interaction, good or bad, shapes us into who we're meant to become. Maybe you've been in a similar situation, burned by misplaced trust or caught off guard by someone else's intentions. If so, I'd love to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we navigate relationships, protect ourselves, and grow from our experiences. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. It lets me know you want to see more stories like this one. Better yet, subscribe to the channel and join our growing community of curious minds who love exploring life's twists and turns together. Trust me, there's plenty more where this came from. One last thing, if this story resonated with you, share it with a friend. You never know who might need to hear it today. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next video.